My name's Daniel Saad, and I'll be discussing how the world's lack of commitment to fully reverse the effects of climate change affect all of humankind. The effects of climate change cause severe illnesses and death. Not dealing with the effects cause a large economic loss for many countries, and the proposed plans to reverse the effects of climate change are ineffective. This makes the climate change crisis a human rights crisis. If we cannot collectively get together to reverse the effects of our own actions, we will never be able to go back, and the Earth will continue to rise in temperature. First, let me explain what the climate change crisis is and what its effects are. Climate change is caused by global warming. The Earth has increased about 1 degree Celsius since pre-industrial times. The rate at which the Earth is increasing in temperature is alarming, and, contrary to popular belief, not part of the Earth's natural cycle. If the Earth increases 2 degrees Celsius, the effects of climate change will be irreversible. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, which includes more than 1,300 scientists from across the globe, predict that the temperature will rise another 2.5 to 10 degrees Celsius over the next century if we keep living as we do. The rise in temperature is caused by the amount of greenhouse gases emitted globally, which create a blanket in the Earth's atmosphere, trapping the sun's heat and sending it back to the planet. The rise in temperature has caused loss of sea ice, longer, more intense heat waves, increased precipitation levels, and an accelerated sea level rise. Global sea level rise has increased in about 8 inches since record-keeping began in 1880. This is the result of land ice melting and the expansion of seawater as it warms, which can cause floods. Climate change also causes extreme weather such as tornadoes, blizzards, hail, hurricanes, and droughts. It also causes violent storms, whether it be dust, rain, snow, or ice. The IPCC has stated that if we do not globally reduce our carbon emissions by 50% by 2030, the effects of climate change will be irreversible, and there will be no going back. We will miss the opportunity on preventing extremely serious and possibly catastrophic events, which is why world leaders must take action. First of all, the effects of climate change cause severe illnesses and death. The intense heat waves from the rise in Earth's temperature have caused 400 more deaths than normal in the Netherlands, a 15% increase from last year. They've also caused more than 18,000 hospitalizations in Japan and an estimated 169 million people on alert in the United States. On July 25th, Paris experienced one of its hottest days on record, a previously unthinkable 109 degrees. Climate change is also causing illnesses such as asthma and hay fever to become more severe, and wildfires and pollution, which pose a risk to respiratory health. Smog, which is created when air pollutants released from burning fuel react with heat and sunlight, has been linked to higher rates of stroke, heart attack, diabetes, lung cancer, and chronic lung disease. According to the World Health Organization, up to 4.2 million people die every year as a result of exposure of air pollutants and smog. India's capital, New Delhi, also known as the most polluted country in the world, is suffering a thick smog, 3 times the hazardous level on the Global Air Quality Index. Due to climate change, people all across the world are getting hospitalized, ill, and killed. If changes are not made and the Earth increases 2 degrees Celsius, the effects of climate change will be uncontrollable and eventually cause the extinction of the human race. Secondly, climate change causes economic losses. Although fixing the problem is highly expensive, not doing anything will cost more and hurt a nation's economy more. In the United States, asthma alone costs $80 billion due to medical care, asthma-related mortality, and missed school and work days. Those who live in urban areas are affected more as they are exposed to higher concentrations of environmental triggers of asthma, such as cars, highways, and factories. Since 1980, extreme weather has cost $1.6 trillion. Munich Re, the world's largest reinsurance firm, blamed climate change for the $24 billion of losses in the California wildfires. Scientists estimate that if temperatures rise 2 degrees Celsius, the global gross domestic product will fall by 15%. If nothing is done, temperatures will rise by 4 degrees Celsius. By 2100, the global GDP will decline by more than 30% from 2010 levels. That's worse than the Great Depression, where global trade fell 25%. The only difference is that this would be permanent. Now, making an effort to reverse the effects of climate change will cost trillions more than funding a solution. Third of all, the proposed plans to reverse the effects of climate change are ineffective. Let me start with what the world leaders have promised so far. In 2015, the Paris Climate Accord was signed by 195 countries who pledged to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 25 to 28% of 2005 levels by 2025. They also committed $3 billion in aid for poor countries by 2020. The Accord's goal is to keep global warming from rising 2 degrees Celsius from pre-industrial levels, which acts as a tipping point. However, even if all the countries follow the Accord, temperatures will continue to rise as the atmosphere is still reacting to the carbon dioxide that has already been pumped into it. Therefore, measures need to be stricter to reverse global warming and enact actual change. In 2016, the Paris Climate Agreement went into force as 55 members who made up 55% of global gas emissions ratified the agreement. In 2017, President Trump announced that the United States would withdraw from the agreement. He stated that he wanted to negotiate a better deal. Leaders from Germany, France, and Italy said that the climate accord was non-negotiable. China and India joined the other leaders by committing to the climate accord. It is important to keep in mind that the United States makes up 20% of the global gas emissions, and without their help, it would be difficult to reach the accord's goal. This year, during the UN's Climate Change Summit, many world leaders suggested plans to cut carbon emissions in their respective countries. India, China, and the European Union said they will deliver tougher plans to cut carbon emissions by 2021 and 2030. Major ports, banks, and shipping lines are committing to net zero carbon shipping by 2030. Finland aims to become the first industrialized nation to absorb more carbon than it emits, and Pakistan, which has planted 1 billion trees in the last 5 years, plans to plant 10 billion more by the next 5. All of the proposed plans will take effect next year at the earliest, but we won't see an actual impact until just before or after 2030. None of the plans will have the large-scale impact needed to combat climate change either, and none of the largest carbon-polluting countries gave any solutions to do their part. The lack of commitment from these countries will ensure that the world's carbon emissions won't be cut in half by 2030. Due to the lack of commitment from these countries, Greta Thunberg and 15 other youth activists have filed a formal complaint against 5 of the largest carbon-polluting countries to the UN on the grounds that they are violating their rights as children. This complaint will allow the UN to classify the climate crisis as a children's rights crisis, forcing the countries to participate in cutting their emissions. They include, among others, the right to life, health, peace, all with special stipulations for indigenous groups. This complaint acted as a catalyst for more lawsuits. Levi Draham, Nathan Bering, and 21 other youths are suing the United States government for failing to adequately protect the earth against the effects of climate change. They claim the federal government's promotion of fossil fuel production and its indifference to the risk being posed by greenhouse gas emissions have resulted in a dangerously destabilizing climate system that threatens the survival of future generations. This violates their fundamental constitutional rights to life, liberty, and property. Young Canadian activists are also planning to sue the Canadian federal government over climate change, claiming Ottawa's role in perpetuating the crisis violates their fundamental rights. The lawsuit will claim they have suffered specific individualized injuries due to climate change, interfering with their constitutional rights to life, liberty, and property. Similar lawsuits brought by other lawyers are playing out in other nations, including Belgium, New Zealand, and have been won in Pakistan, Austria, and South Africa. Last year, a Dutch court ordered the government to reduce carbon emissions by 1/4 in the next 5 years. The lack of commitment from world leaders to reversing the effects will have detrimental effects, and urging world leaders to take initiative is crucial. To conclude, climate change directly affects everybody in the world, no matter their status or geographical position. It makes illnesses and diseases more severe and sometimes life-threatening. It causes intense weather conditions that make it hard for people to breathe and intensify hurricane storms and floods, which eradicate people from their homes. The lack of commitment also costs governments a lot of money, as you have to pay to repair all the damage from climate change, and so do you, as a taxpayer. Yes, we will be able to adapt to warmer climates and find a way to survive despite these changes. However, the overall effects of unmanaged climate change across the world will be devastating and leave the earth barren. The lack of commitment to reverse the effects of climate change from world leaders will doom humanity.